You're just shaking your head over there. The one Eagles fan. Yeah. 9 years ago, I started looking for a job as an official pastor. 9.5 or so. I worked in churches for 7 years already. I worked 5 summers in church camps with ridiculous long hair, and I had holes in all my clothes, and there was no filter to the things I said, to which some of you think, you have a filter now? I was kind of like a dirtbag climber that should be living in a van, but I was doing that while working at churches. But 9 years ago was the time to get serious and to get ordained. And so I cut off my ponytail, and I bought some new clothes, and I started shaving like once a month. Isn't that okay? And after turning down a couple of really cool social justice jobs that weren't in a congregation, finally I found this church in Charlotte that I kind of liked, and they kind of liked me. So they brought me out. Pretty clear I was their top choice. And after the interviews with the search committee and meeting with the senior pastor and all these little Presbyterian committees grilling you on things, finally we were having that dinner to get things organized at the end. And all that was left was, a few little steps. But I had to admit at this dinner that I was a vegetarian. I didn't eat barbecue. And they're like, oh, what? It was like I told them I didn't like SEC football and ACC basketball. But after dinner, the only thing remaining, a couple real formal steps, a couple votes. The chair of the committee, this classic older Southern woman who says things like, well, bless your heart. And what does bless your heart mean? It really means like, go bless yourself. Patty knows. But that lady, she takes me into the other room with a table with the white doily tablecloth. I mean, she is formal as can be. And she sits me down so serious, and she asks me, is there anything about you that will embarrass us on the floor of Presbyterian? Which really was her way of asking me, are you gay? And I had no desire to get into that question that she was trying to ask, so I just answered the first question, and I responded to her first question. I said, yeah, I've had a ponytail for the last 14 years. And she said, well, let's keep that between ourselves. I didn't really mean to grow my hair out, and my facial hair changes like every week, but I have a ponytail again, and I want an amen for that. Amen. It is not a man bun. Absolutely. Not at all. Yeah. I've found in so many churches that people get so worked up about the pastor's hair. I have so many female colleagues who get so that people will come up to them after a sermon and say, beautiful shoes, and she will think, what was my sermon about? People spend so much energy and so much worry over things that don't really matter. I see churches that complain about a carpet. They change a carpet, and people think, oh, Jesus would never walk on that carpet, so I'm going to leave. You leave over a carpet? I see churches all over the place that split over music. I hear horror stories about people who boycott the church because the sweet old pastor never visited someone in a hospital because no one ever called the sweet old pastor to come visit in the hospital. I promise you, half the things that I get credit for is nonsense that I barely had anything to do. That's stuff you do, credit stuff. And I promise you, half the things that people complain about me, same deal. Didn't really do much about that. But it's not just in churches, and it's not just with easy scapegoats. The same sort of thing happens in families when parents and kids, they fight over one little thing over here because there's really something a lot bigger on the other side. It happens at the Nederland Board of Trustee meetings when after Jim left, we spent an hour and a half talking about little fences for rich people and coyotes, and we didn't have time to talk about housing for people and kids in this town. It happens in our own hearts when so often we get worked up about one thing and we don't have the energy for the other things that really matter. Sometimes people get so caught up in the little stuff that annoys them and they cannot see the big things that God is doing or that God is calling them to do. Sometimes people are so concerned with what is not perfect, they're more concerned with that than the imperfect things that are loving and so very important in their lives. Sometimes the perfect becomes the enemy of the good. And hold on to that for a minute. Because in the story that Dennis just read, in fact, in almost all of Jesus' stories, he's talking about one thing, but he's really talking about something else, right? Just like that woman with her question, it's really about something else. So even though Wall Street Jesus might be all inspired by this story to cut taxes and invest, in this story, what does the money stand for? The bags of silver, the talents of silver in the original language? It's love. Investing love. This is a parable about the kingdom of God where the real currency is love. And when we bury that love, no good. Useless servants. When we share it to the point of multiplying, that love, there is a hint there in God's dream for us. So the question is, how are we doing as a church in sharing and multiplying our love? Are we afraid to risk and invest our love? Or is there some sense of perfection and purity that is holding us back from being a good, loving community? Are we more concerned with our messy parts or focused on multiplying love amongst ourselves and in our greater community, no matter what it takes? God has given us this building, these people, this history. Do you think we are burying love and finding fault with one another, or are we good investments for God to spread the good news with even more impact through these imperfect servants? Jim tells me that I never toot our own horn when I'm up here, and so he asked me like a couple times, do a top 10 list of like what's good going on in this church that people don't really know. Will you settle for 7? It's kind of a biblical number. It's Harrison's birthday. So we got 7. Okay, so that's number 7. What Jim did is number 7 for how we multiply love. Because when you have an idea, when you tell me a hymn that is meaningful to you, when you just reach out and share in making this church be something, man, that is a model of God's peace when you are invested in what we do and say here. And I want to thank all of you and invite you to keep doing this, to share ideas, serve on committees, volunteer on projects, and just be involved. If you don't, I promise you, that is burying our talents as a church. So that's number 7. Number 6, similar but a little more pointed. Betty Ventrella, who couldn't get here because of the weather, a lot of people couldn't today, she has asked me multiple times that when we do the Lord's Prayer to speak directly into the mic and say the whole Lord's Prayer. Actually, she doesn't ask me, she tells me very graciously. She holds on to my elbows, so she reaches up to there. But she tells me that, and I fail a bunch. By the time I'm getting into the Lord's Prayer, I'm already thinking about the charge and benediction, and so sometimes I just forget. A lot of people tell me, hey, can you make sure the liturgist and you will tell us what the hymns are so we have time to open the hymns and all that stuff? And I forget all the time, but you keep asking me little by little. It's probably harder for the introverts and for people who are newer to the church to come up and tell me these things and give me advice, but the door is always open for questions and challenging me on some language or idea that I offered on God's behalf. So if you're hurting, and you're hurting about the fact that I didn't know you were hurting, well, come tell me. The door is always open for you to help me do my job better so that we can do our job better. And a lot of you, this is number 6, you do come in. A lot of people come in. The ones that don't reach out and hold on to some perceived slight, that is burying an opportunity to learn from each other and forgive and grow. And often that silence multiplies itself into a grudge way beyond anything that ever went wrong. But the ones who do come in with an issue, that is not nitpicking, in my opinion. That is showing that you care. And to me, that is evidence of a church investing themselves in the task of spreading love. Number 5, the reason why I think we're multiplying in love rather than burying and avoiding is this. In the last few years, a whole bunch of people, and this is kind of weird when this starts, and then someone else says it, and then someone else says it, and I wonder, are there conversations happening everywhere? But a lot of you have expressed some worry that, Hansen's like almost here for 5 years. He's probably going to go somewhere. Some big fancy church is going to steal him away. Big and fancy, that is not my style at all. And maybe you haven't experienced this in Nederland, but I've lived here long enough to realize I really can't make it in civilized society anymore. Can you imagine me wearing a tie and like a church robe every week? It's just not going to work. So I say this next sentence with like sincere commitment and appreciation, but also with a touch of like genuine fear, because someday I will move, right? Someday I will move on. I don't know when that is, but it's not anytime soon. Where could I go to find a church where I could be me and serve at the same time through the God of peace? How many places can you be you and be called to that place? That is a hard combination to find. Yeah, sometimes some of y'all drive me nuts. Well, bless you too, Hansen. But I am here and I'm happy, and you give me the space to do my job with what I feel is integrity. And I know hundreds of pastors, and I would say, I'm going to guess 80% of pastors cannot say that sentence, and probably 80% of congregations can't say it either. And when that can't happen, it's so much harder to multiply love. So amen that we can do that. Number 4, other things people are so worried about here are the finances. Mary Lou couldn't make it up, so I'm going to have to fill in a little finances with her. Y'all told me 4.5 years ago when I came out here, he said, Hansen, we have 3 or 5 years, somewhere in there, to get our finances on track, or else we just won't be able to keep paying. 3 to 5 years. So at our congregational meeting, which I implore you all to be here after church today, you're going to see that in 2017, our finances were better than we expected by almost a whole talent. The Bible word talent, your translation was a little different, is 75 pounds, and 75 pounds of silver in today's money is about $20,000. And so this year, 2017, last year, we outperformed our expectations by $17,000. We still ran a deficit, but that's pretty good, right?
Yes.
Yeah. We outperformed our expectations in 2016 also by closer to 2 talents, so you can do the math there. We outperformed our expectations in 2015, and in 2014, and in 2013, and in 2012. I don't have the data that goes back there, but for the last 6 years, we've said we want to get here so we can keep this church going, and every year God has surprised us somehow, some way. We are not financially stable yet, and I'm not sure that a small church in the mountains is ever going to be able to be financially stable without the endowments that we have, but because of the endowments that people have left us through their wills years ago, and because of hard works on grants and stewardship campaigns over these years, because of hard work of you giving to this church, because of hard work of our leaders being careful in our spending, we keep on going, and God keeps surprising us. Number 3, socks and sandwiches is awesome. How many of you have been to a socks and sandwiches? Served, met someone? Many of you get to talk to those folks on Thursday, but fewer of you realize what happens after those Thursdays. Very few of you get to notice that when someone who's been camping for months, like maybe a bipolar former meth addict, puts on a dress to come to worship. That's cool stuff. And when that woman comes in during the week and she says, why does your church do that? Why? I want to get her words right. Why do you care about people like us? That was her question. And I said, well, Jesus got accused all the time of hanging out with drunks and homeless and prostitutes. And we just want to make it a place here where we can have a lot of drunks and homeless people to feel comfortable. And she looks at me and she says, Pastor Hansen, you don't know how many prostitutes you know, do you? I think if they can come here and get a meal without being judged, that is awesome. Number 2, Rocky Mountain Mission is awesome. Many of you get to see the results of the service work. Some of you get to be involved in the sweat. Jim wants more of you involved in the sweat for that. Some of you have been there. That's that outside voice that we love. Some of you have been on Wednesday. How many have been to Wednesday night mission thing where you get to see the devotionals there? That's pretty cool stuff. But none of you really get to see the hidden little transformative things that happen through the week, except Jim and I. Last summer, one of our groups was really terrible at planning, and they put Jim in a real bind, and then only 3 kids showed up, and it's really hard to get 3 teenagers to talk a lot, and just 3, with a bunch of adults staring them down. But by Thursday night, kids were, I planned an activity where instead of answering the questions, they could just pick up a picture. I'd ask them a question, they'd pick up a picture that answered the question for them. I thought it might get the quiet ones a little more involved, and that quiet boy, the one who, his hat's down here, and his hair's down to here, and he's always talking like right in here. He never talks to you. He picked a picture. My guess is he might not have done this if Jim hadn't told him something about his military background. He picks up a picture of a soldier in all gear hugging a little boy. And I said, what? I said, why'd you pick that picture? And he says, my dad's in the military, and I haven't seen him for a couple years, and I just really miss him. And his adult advisor and one of the other teenagers both put a hand on his back. Didn't say anything, they just put a hand on his back. And I really don't care how much trail work or painting we got done that day. It's moments like that when that boy, whatever he might ever believe about God, he knew that this was a safe place, and he was loved, and God was on his side. The number one reason why I think that we are a good investment for God, why God might give us more bags of silver to keep investing, bags of love, is that these walls are so permeable. They definitely help so many groups in the church and out of it to meet here. So you get Boy Scouts and Girl Scouts, and you get Christmas Eve craziness and Tai Chi and music lessons and so many things that happen in these walls. But the impact of this church flows way out of these walls. As Will was saying with videos, they're starting to take off a little bit. So Amy sends sermons to her dad, and that's awesome. He's liked some of those. Tracy Foster is someone who comes in here once in a while, friends with some of you. Her mother is a fan of this church and likes every video. And her mother was here on Christmas Eve and came over and bear hugged me. I swear she picked me up. She's like 60 years old, just picked me right up to hug me. So people get involved from all over the world. We get messages from New Jersey and North Carolina and Turkey. We've had letters from Turkey about people who love what we do online. So thanks to Jim for keeping the walls up, and thanks for Will for breaking through them. But more than that, when I leave these walls, I can't go to a meeting in town without someone else from this church there caring about their neighbors, even when we disagree. I can't walk to the grocery store or sit in a coffee shop without running into someone who cares about something that originated somehow from this church. When I go have a beer in town, almost every time I end up talking to a bartender or some libertarian grizzly guy from Rollinsville or some drunk Eldora lifty who says, "Oh, you're part of that church." Right? This happens to me all the time. And I know half the time someone says you're part of that church, that means, I don't like something you're doing. But you know what? I'd rather be a that church than a you're from where? What we do matters. We cannot be accused of burying ourselves. We are investing the love that God has given us. And I hope that it continues to multiply. We have plenty of room to improve on our investments of love. Much of that starts here. But this place matters for the hearts in these pews and for the souls that will never sit in them. Amen? Amen. Amen. Then let's sing our song, whatever the one is next.